I love film. When a film is well done, I get to disappear into another world for a couple of hours and come out on the other side, desperately wanting to talk to others about the experience. First, it's getting lost in the story, and I can geek out for hours on the characters and how their journey worked out. And then it's about the technique, how well it was written, how did the performances carry the script through, and how did the filmmakers use the technology available to them to create a new world for the audience to get lost in. Being a techie, I love everything about the process of filmmaking, from the writing to the nitty-gritty of how the visuals are created and how the sound comes together to make the experience more real. In 1977, just like millions of others, I saw Star Wars for the first time. My dad and I traveled to Manhattan from Brooklyn to see it in a movie palace called the Los Astor Plaza in Times Square. It was a special experience, not just because my dad and I got the day together to see the movie, but because it was a special movie, presented at the height of the technology of the day. The theater had a 70mm projection system and was one of the first to incorporate a new sound technology from a place called Dolby Labs. Star Wars was groundbreaking in many ways. The visual effects were amazing for the time and well used in telling a classic hero's story arc. But the single moment in the film that stands out in my memory, even after 45 years, I can still close my eyes and experience the moment in full, was Obi-Wan in the cavern at the center of the Death Star, there to disable the tractor beam so the Millennium Falcon can escape with the princess. And in that moment, the echo of voices of some of the stormtrooper guards starts in the front of this 1,500-seat theater I'm sitting in and echoes past me, ending in the back of the room. Suddenly, I'm not just watching this cavern, I'm inside it. That moment, which transformed the experience, and to be honest, probably my life with it, was the product of not just creative, but technical expertise. I never saw, or for that matter heard, a movie in the same way again. And today, I get to talk to a man whose expertise creates that ability for all of us to escape into other worlds. So where does that expertise come from? Well, when passion meets preparation and practice. Larry Blake is a supervising sound editor re-recording mixer for feature films. He's worked on over 80 features since 1989 and won an Emmy for his work on Behind the Candelabra in 2013. He's been working with filmmaker Steven Soderbergh since the beginning, with 29 features and 3 television seasons, plus multiple films from Victor Nuñez, David Gordon Green, and the Duplass Brothers. He has written extensively on film sound, beginning in 1981 for recording engineer-producer, and then In the Mix. These writings total over 110 columns and 35 feature articles. Right now, he's working on a book on the digital archiving of motion pictures called Solving the Digital Dilemma. From 2000 to 2016, he owned Swelltone Labs, a post-production sound facility in New Orleans where he lives and works. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. It's my honor.
So tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer for movies. The editorial and mixing parts have just joined in the past year at the Academy Awards. There are 2 different parts of the art and craft of film sound, I should say post-production film sound. And there used to be 2 Oscars for about 25 years, and now they've combined them into one. I both supervise sound editing, do sound editing, and do mixing. And more people these days are doing both. It's actually fairly common, where 30 years ago when I started, it was not common at all.
Is that a factor of the change from the more analog tools to the digital tools?
It certainly makes it easier, and it makes it more sensible to blend the 2 disciplines. But I mean, I was doing it starting back when I was using multi-track tape. So
right.
It's really more of a, dare I say, pretension alert coming up here, a holistic approach to film sound, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be two separate groups of people.
Got it. Okay. Did you start out with a vision someday of being a sound editor, or what were you expecting to be when you were a kid, or when you?
Well, when I first got the movie bug, I uh, newsflash here, I wanted to direct, because the film that caught my attention was Citizen Kane, which is
Ah,
maybe along with 2001, the thing that spurred more young people to want to direct movies than any other.
yep.
Um, and so I then tried to learn everything I could about the whole thing of filmmaking, focusing really on directing and cinematography. And then whenever I tried to find anything good about film sound, there was nothing. It was either too general, their dialogue, their music, and sound effects,
Hmm.
or it was too technical, as in, how to build equipment, which I have never and will never have any interest in.
Okay.
So I then went to Los Angeles to write a book on the history of film sound,
Okay.
project that's still in the works. But in the process, I have been writing about film sound since 1981, and for the first 7 years, I worked a little bit in film sound, but I didn't really start mixing movies until '89. And so when I started mixing, it was after many years of writing very, very how can I say it? Not how to, but how it was done type of articles,
Okay.
uh, for then Sound Magazine recording engineer producer.
Okay.
And so when I got started doing it, it felt very simple and straightforward to me, and that's how I basically made the shift. I didn't go there with the intention of getting into film sound. I was going there just trying to learn about it.
Okay. Did you go to film school while you were here?
No, never did. And I went to LSU Baton Rouge for 5 semesters in the mid '70s, and I flunked out of LSU twice,
Huh.
which is no small achievement. And there was no film program then. I was studying journalism,
Okay.
such as you study journalism. I would never recommend anyone study journalism or filmmaking in a college. You should either study, have a liberal arts degree, have an English degree, have a history degree.
Yeah.
But anything you're going to learn in journalism school, you're going to learn for fresh anyway when you get to a given newspaper. And with respect to filmmaking, especially today. I mean, when I was starting, it was Super 8 double system sound was the thing. That was the most powerful tool you had.
Yeah.
It really is Pleistocene era compared to what kids have today.
Yeah.
But I did learn the basics of editing and syncing and negative cutting
Yep.
and things like that. And so I just basically, once I flunked out the second time, started making Super 8 movies, and that's how it began.
My son, first of all, is a graduate of journalism school. So I completely understand what you're talking about, because I think in his life right now, all his education has done for him is bring frustration, because he sees the standards of what journalism should be based on what he's learned. And he doesn't see that in practice based on the particular place that he's working right now. He's not working for one of the major news outlets like, the LA Times or Associated Press, but journalism standards slide depending on what particular world of journalism you're living in. And I get the filmmaking also, because when I first moved out to LA, I signed up for the UCLA film certificate at their extension program.
Uh-huh.
Took classes there for a couple of years, and I've always felt that where it was really valuable to me were the here's a specific tool and how it works kind of training, rather than film history. I mean, you're either interested in film and you have a vision for it, right? You look at it and you understand the language of it, and that's not the kind of thing that you necessarily pick up in class, I think, and become an artist, right? It's either inside you or it's not.
I think the art part is absolutely that. And other than whatever connections you might get if you go to a proverbial USC, UCLA, or
Mm-hmm.
NYU, I don't think that there's any real benefit to it. I mean, in film sound, it's interesting enough, five of the top 15 people in the history of film sound went to USC.
Hmm.
You certainly three of the top five by any standard did. That's Scary Rydstrom, Ben Burt, and Walter Murch.
Yeah.
Um, they're pioneering and insanely talented and insanely good people, all of them too.
Hmm.
Um, but I would guess, and I mean Ken Mura, I know was their common teacher, but I would guess that they would probably agree with me that you don't have to go to XYZ school or whatever, and especially the idea of spending that money.
Yeah.
I mean, journalism is different than filmmaking in a sense that journalism isn't what it was when I was in journalism school. Was right when All the President's Men was happening.
Yeah.
So I was able to go see All the President's Men first run, being interested in journalism and filmmaking. Um, so that was an interesting time.
Yeah.
But journalism these days has become, its bones have been picked apart
Yeah.
by the changes in technology, and what it pays now and the respect it gets is nowhere near
Yeah.
what it could be. But whereas filmmaking, there's a huge the number of opportunities have increased. I think with filmmaking.
Yeah, having a 4K film recorder built into your cell phone with fairly reasonable picture quality has certainly democratized it, right?
Oh yeah,
When I first came out here, if you wanted to do a real project, you had to go to a place like Technicolor and beg them for film ends to shoot on it, and see if they'd give it to you for free, so you had film stock to play with for your
truly.
student film. Right now, all of that's
Truly.
gone away.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, it's. I mean, it was so the act of getting a print made. I used to cut. I wasn't cutting negative. I was cutting reversal original
yeah,
Super 8, and used to A/B roll everything. And working in Super 8 as I did, you had to do everything. And even though the tools were very primitive, you still got a good basis in the fundamentals of filmmaking, and you knew what a short focal length was going to give you versus a longer one,
yeah.
etc. Not the kids today don't know that too, but it was, I think, a good thing to have that pit of your stomach feeling for a week or however long it took us to get our process reversal originals back to see if there's an image on screen.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep. Yep. I remember that. I remember that just with still photography as well. You took those pictures. You always took 5 of them because you never knew whether or not you were going to get the right one if it was important. Yep.
yeah.
So, how did your desire to be a director become focus on sound? You talk about how there wasn't a lot written about sound. Is that what drew you into it? That you wanted to be the guy to focus and bring attention to it?
I first got a job in film sound in early 1985 in the sound library of a company, Weddington Productions, and I worked in the library for about 2.5, 3 years, and I helped design a small studio there. And all this was based on research I'd done and writing I'd done for the magazine. And then when that small studio was built, I just knew you could mix a movie there, and because my colleagues were strictly sound editors and they'd been used to going to the big mixing stages, it was sort of abstract to them. But I knew based on research I'd done that it was possible. So then, lo and behold, a friend of mine, who was also a friend of one of the owners of the company, which say Mark Mangini, um, the friend of Mark's and mine was doing a low budget movie, and he wanted to see if we could get a good deal on doing the post sound of the film. And I'd had minimal experience with editing and mixing sound at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my experience had been in the sound library. And so we did that movie. And that movie, the friend of Mark's and mine was Steven Soderbergh,
Huh.
and the film was Slides and Videotape.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first movie. I mean, I'd mixed a movie before that, but really someone else. My buddy Dale Strumpel was the real mixer on that.
Okay.
But so Sex Lives was my first mix, and it was a real trial by fire, and I think we did pretty well. I mean,
Yeah.
if you see the Criterion edition of the movie that came out in 2018,
Yeah.
there was a special featurette that I did there, which talks about the process of sound and how the history of that film has been over the years.
Yeah.
and it really shows how the movie progressed year by year by year,
Okay.
and and so you really get a chance to see. I really open up the kimono and show people how bad it sounded in my first iteration of the mix, which was for the Sundance Film Festival. Then it was called the U.S. Film Festival, but
Okay.
how that for how bad that first mix was, and how much has been improved over the years. So then once I did that movie, I got a real taste for it, and I figured the world needed a possibly good film sound person more than it need a possibly mediocre director. There
Huh.
was enough competition there, so I just sort of shifted and never looked
Very
back.
cool. What's your favorite movie?
Favorite movie of all time is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Ah,
I just I think that movie just fires on all cylinders. That there's it has one of the transcendent film scores of all time. The performances by all the everyone to a person, from Scout to Atticus to um, the sheriff of Macomb County. Everybody is just wonderful in it. Um, and you could say, well, it's not a perfect movie because you can see the Santa Monica Mountains behind. We're not quite in Macomb County, Georgia, Alabama.
yeah.
Um, but forgiving that mistake, it's really just a special movie that I have to parse it out. I saw it about about a couple months ago, and I had last seen it about 4 years before that, and then before that, it had been. I don't see it more than every 5 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go 15 years without seeing it because it's a little precious gem of emotion.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I think the Boo Radley moment in the last few scenes of the movie is right up there with the bone cutting to the missile in 2001 as a moment that is just unduplicatable.
Okay. So, what film then? Breaking down the technical bit a little bit as a sound person, which film stands out the most for you as an achievement in sound?
Well, as far as sound is concerned, although To Kill a Mockingbird has some really cool echo in the second to last scene when Jem and Scott are walking through the field after the state fair or whatever,
Yeah.
the costume thing,
Yeah.
except for some cool echo in the voice there. Sound is not really special.
Hmm.
But the good news for us is that there's a lot of special movies with special sound, and Top of the Pops pretty much. And I'm not alone in this. It's sort of like saying Revolver is your favorite album.
Yeah.
Um, is Apocalypse Now, which has the interesting footnote in my personal history that it was the first mix that I ever attended.
Okay.
Um, in May of 1979, there was a preview screening a week before it went to Cannes at the Bruin Theater in Los Angeles
Hmm.
in Westwood. There was a benefit screening for the Pacific Film Archive. Is that what it's called in Berkeley? Um, and we stood in line the whole day. I just moved to LA 3 weeks earlier,
Hmm.
and stood in line, and we got tickets. And there was a 7 o'clock screening which people like Spielberg and Lucas went to, and then there was a 11 o'clock screening where people who got in early in line, like myself, went to, and then there was yet another screening at 2 a.m. For the movie, and so I saw the 7 o'clock screening and was completely blown away by how good it sounded.
Yeah.
And afterwards, after that screening, Coppola was out front by himself with actually John Milius, the writer, was there, and Gene Siskel,
The critic.
the critic, was there,
Yeah.
and so I got a chance to witness a very funny exchange between Mr. Coppola and Mr. Siskel. And after Mr. Siskel was finished, I went up to Mr. Coppola and asked him, it's a great sound, amazing movie. I'm writing on film sound. How can I find out more about it? And he said, go to San Francisco and call Walter Murch. Well, I did the next day, but Walter was busy. But I did go back in the summer in July, third week of July in '79, and I was at the mix stage on Pacific Avenue in North Beach area, San Francisco,
Yeah.
for 3 days while they were final mixing the movie, and it put a couple of hooks in me. One was this was a really cool thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, the other one was that this was this is a cool thing because if you work with a really good group of people, as they clearly had, with the three lead mixers, Walter Murch, Richard Beggs, and Mark Berger, plus the whole crew around them, many of whom went on to have stellar careers in film sound. It was just looked like a great thing to do. And the other one was that it was in a really small room. It was like 20 feet wide by 40 feet long, very small ceiling, low ceiling.
Yeah.
And so it made it humane as opposed to big, you know, purple rooms in Hollywood with quad 8 consoles
Yeah.
in them and with a bunch of cynical old mixers who were straight from Albert Brooks's movie Modern Romance, if you've ever seen
Yeah.
that great scene.
Yep.
Um, and this was the opposite of that. So cut to 7 years later, when we were building this room at Weddington, and I was helping design it, I knew you could mix a movie in a small room.
Hmm.
You know, as in the first words of John Lennon's "All You Need Is Love." There's nothing you can do that can't be done, and if you can mix Apocalypse in a small room, you can do anything else.
Yeah.
Uh, Granted, they mixed for 8 months, but that aside, so it was a real turning point with me. I mean, I continued to write about sound, focused writing for a couple of years, but I knew I had seen something that was really special. And to this day, whenever I hear it, it never ceases to amaze me. In the 40th anniversary version that came out 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I got a chance to hear it again in theaters, and it just there's some stuff in there that is just sort of outlandishly creative. You know, like Dolung Bridge, and
Yeah.
the helicopter attack on the village,
Yeah.
what the crew called Baler, which is the place in the Philippines where it was shot. But the helicopter attack on the village is the one everyone talks about. But to me, it's like the Kurtz compound and Dolung Bridge, um, and those are moments. And I was lucky enough when I was there for 3 days in July of '79. I watched them mix two reels, and one of which was the Puppy Sampan reel,
Yeah.
um, and the other one was Dolong Bridge. And when I see the movie now, I still see the changeover marks in the whites going across that were on the black and white print that they were mixing to.
Yeah.
So
That's cool.
yeah, it's pretty special. I mean, others I can throw at you. Um, Altered States, in its original run, played in 70 millimeter, like at the Bruin, excuse me, at the Village Theater in Westwood,
Yeah.
and my buddy Steve Katz did the sound effects on that, and that was a crazy, amazing experience that is legendary in the annals of Hollywood film sound. Um, Fight Club is the best sound job of the past 25 years. Ren Kleiss for David Fincher.
Yeah.
It's pretty. I've only seen it one time. I'm scared to see it again because it makes me want to just quit.
Do you, when you're doing the sound mix, do you mix it with certain sound playback systems in mind, like Dolby Atmos versus something else, or is that generic as far as the mix goes? I'm just curious. And also,
I
go ahead. No, finish.
yeah. Let me go ahead and go to that because that's an important question. In a sense, I do view it as generic, and I view it as 5.1. And the reason is that whether I'm in my small home studio, whether I'm at a bigger mix studio somewhere else, where I'm at a large mix studio somewhere else, or whether I'm at the Goldwyn Theater at the Academy on Wilshire Boulevard,
Yeah.
um, 5.1 essentially sounds the same.
Mm-hmm.
5.1 also falls down directly to a two-track mix in a very straightforward manner. And I think that tool of 5.1 that has been around widely since the early 90s is really creatively the point of diminishing returns. And it really do sort of diminish
Hmm.
because I think when you get to stuff like Atmos, it can have the danger of calling attention to itself very quickly.
Hmm.
And then there's the issue of, like I was saying about, 5.1 goes from small mixed rooms to even to home theaters and to the Goldwyn Theater. Atmos at home is Larry Blake. Atmos in a good theater like the Dolby Atmos, Dolby Cinema theaters at AMC theaters,
Yeah.
it's like LeBron James. Okay. Larry Blake plays basketball. LeBron James plays basketball. The way I play basketball has nothing to do with the way LeBron James. And Dolby Atmos in the home, it's really a joke, and I've never been shy about saying this.
Yeah.
It really, the idea that so much emphasis is put on it by, I mean, a lot of the streaming services make it mandatory, and people talk about future proofing. You future proof something by giving it greater resolution,
Yeah.
and having more speakers is not the stuff of resolution. Um, and resolution either in terms of image capture or sampling rate or bit depth or whatever. But
Right.
but but there's only so much you can do there. You can't get any greater dynamic range than you have now.
Yeah.
You can't with Atmos because you've got full range on a gazillion speakers, and you could fry people's brains if you
Yeah.
wanted to. Um,
What
so
what I find interesting is it feels like, at least in the home video space, sound mixing is changing from, have expecting you to have 11 speakers in your living room to having one sound bar with some kind of spatial audio processor in it that gives you the effect of it being three-dimensional. Um, do do guys like you go back and master the video releases later, or do they do some kind of mumbo jumbo, taking the work you did for the original theatrical release and making it into something that just falls into the home video release?
yeah, the answer is that some people make a big deal out of making a near field mix, but I think that if you have to spend a lot of time and effort making a near field mix, your theatrical mix is probably too damn loud. So that's one point. The other one is that you can't, the idea of people who have those, like you say, those various modes where you can make Citizen Kane and Mono sound like it's coming from 30 speakers. Well, you can't accommodate for that, so that just is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, but home theater, you really need to just mix within a very specific dynamic range, knowing that the one thing you can piss off someone with sound at the home is that you have too wide of a dynamic range. That just is verboten where people are riding their remotes. Um,
Okay. So you've worked on what, 65 films? What's
55 feature films. I'd say like 60 films, and then I've restored about five other films that I initially didn't mix. There were a whole bunch of movies by the director Victor Nuñez from Florida, and I've restored a whole bunch of his movies. I've also gone back and restored my own movies, but I'm not adding the numbers there.
okay?
Um, and I've mixed about 15 feature length documentaries on top of those 65 features.
What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite child
Of the features,
of what you've worked on?
my work or the movies themselves?
Uh, Both. How about that?
Well, my work, there was one movie that very few people saw. My buddy David Green directed, called Undertow. And David let me loose on a couple of scenes with some sound design, some abstract sound effects that really helped tell the story. And there's like three scenes in it that I really proud of, stuff that I did. And So that's one movie sound job I'm proud of. Traffic is up there not only
Mm,
because it's a superb movie, but it was the first big movie. I had done one movie prior to this, a small movie, but it's the first big movie that I mixed entirely within Pro Tools, which is the way I work now, mixing in the box,
Okay.
opposed to using an external audio console and external recorder.
Okay.
Um, and that really changed my career direction, because it just, it was like going from a typewriter to a word processor. Now,
Yeah.
is my work any better? I think it is. Is my sanity? Am I more sane? Absolutely. It allowed me to live in New Orleans and live and work in New Orleans. I couldn't have done it if I was dealing with a machine room with
Right.
hanging multiple mag units or whatever. That would never have happened.
I found that the greater application of technology to filmmaking has opened up the potential of so much more creativity simply because you can iterate more and more and more in the same amount of in the same amount or less time than it used to take you to do it once. Right. I worked in animation for a long time, and I remember when they first brought computers into animation at Disney, there was this idea that it was going to make it cheaper because you make this big investment up front and you don't need as many people and you don't need all of that. And instead, it created what I call the could be better, right? Which is every shot, the second it's finished, goes on the CBB list because it could always be better. And they iterate and they iterate and they iterate until somebody is literally standing at the door pulling it away from them. And you can do amazing, amazing things that way, but it definitely didn't reduce the cost or speed things up.
Well, but I think in this instance, it actually has the effect of doing both. The classic, the triangle of quality, fast, cheap, good, pick two.
Mm-hmm.
I think that mixing in Pro Tools actually does do all three. I think it gives you much more granular control over the over what you're doing. You have less redundant work to do. You have a lot of things you don't need to do. Like if I put something in my Pro Tools in the sound effects track, it's in the sound effects.
Yeah.
I don't have to, in a normal situation, is coming up to fader 32, and you have to assign that to sound effects. It sounds silly, and it's the way movies were mixed for 70 years.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that that's a non-creative thing, and the if you did a time and motion ergonomic study, the amount of time that you don't waste is considerable. And then it has another advantage too, is that if you do something right in a temp dub, then those decisions are saved.
Right.
Such as if you put a little bit of EQ and a little bit of reverb on this syllable, and you change the reverb program here on for that, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That's all saved. Whereas if you have a separate recorder and a separate console and a separate sound sources,
Mm-hmm.
then and separate outboard gear with the reverb, the aggregate apparatus of all that is it's not good. Now, yeah, the obvious question, and I'll say absolutely, is you look at my favorite sound jobs, Apocalypse. I've said many times to talking to people about this is that Apocalypse was one of the least flexible sound jobs ever because they had to go so many generations to fit a large number of sound effects
Mm-hmm.
into a 24 input console.
Mm-hmm.
That if they wanted to unwind one sound in a pre-dub, if they wanted the loach to go from left rear to left front instead of left rear to right front,
Yeah.
if they wanted to change that, they would have to stop at the final mix and then put up all the parts of that helicopter pre-dub, move it, and then print the super effects pre-dub and print in that change, and then take that piece of mag and go back to the final mix.
Okay.
Whereas the way I work now, no matter what I need to do at the final mix, if I am minutes away from hitting stop and having the mix be done, I can do anything. I can do anything right there and then. If I want to make the pan go slower, faster,
Yeah.
whatever I want to do, if I want to put an ADR line in, if I want to lose all these sound effects and add 30 more, that's all a flick of a button.
Yeah.
But like I said, quality is quality. And my favorite sound jobs to a sound job were done in the dark times, if you will. just like my favorite albums were all made
Analog recording
with
equipment and the
analog
overdubbing.
tape.
Yeah,
Not that I think that analog is any better. It's just it's happened to be what the Beatles had. You think
yeah,
the Beatles, if they're working today, wouldn't be recording the Pro Tools? Oh, they would be.
yeah,
Um, but having only 4 tracks for the majority of their career for like 5 years,
yeah,
well, a little less than 5 years because halfway through the White Album they went to 8 track, but 4.5 years from I Want to Hold Your Hand era to midway through what the White Album, they were on 4 track decks,
yeah.
and they were able to take advantage of the fact that they were great players and that they had discipline.
It
Um,
yeah, it took a higher level of discipline and creativity back in the olden days. I can liken a little of this back to computer technology as well. I started out on the computer side of things as a programmer, and I used to write programs on mini computer systems for businesses. And there was a change in the way core technologies worked at one point where you went from having a fixed amount of memory in the machine that was in the core, it was hardware based, to something called virtual memory, where basically the computer operating system swaps data out of the machine memory and puts it on disk really quickly, and gives the impression that you have unlimited memory available to you, right? Um, and I remember distinctly writing code on a what was called a VAX at the time, which had the virtual memory, and then having to port it back to a machine that didn't. And it was like, wow, that's not going to work. You have to go back and retool the whole thing and reimagine how it's going to operate because the box you're working in is much smaller. So you have to be more creative in figuring out how to best use that. And there are days when I miss that, right? The idea of disk storage is cheap. So operating systems are gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes in size, right? Tens of gigabytes in size because disk storage is cheap. But I remember the days, and you probably come across it too, where you had a little floppy disk that ran your operating system for your computer, and you had to swap disks in and out in order to get work done, right? And there was a certain amount of better understanding of techniques to be more elegant, for lack of a better word, to get the work done when you had constraints around it and it wasn't just kind of a free for all.
yeah.
Do you ever go on set for your work, or are you always remote?
So sometimes I do. I'm very lucky that I've done so many movies with Steven Soderbergh, and I know his first unit very well, and I especially stuff like crowd scenes and things like that where what you're getting is truly unique
Mm-hmm.
and 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 uh, and really it's very tough to pull from a library.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do that as much as I can. Ocean's 11, I was there for many weeks.
That's awesome.
Traffic for many weeks. Magic Mike, I was there a lot. When you have crowds, you just cannot pull 500 women screaming at Channing Tatum's crotch. The library, that just is not to be found.
That's funny. How did the pandemic affect your work? I mean, the industry shut down, production shut down for a while. How are you impacted by it?
I was fine actually. We were in the middle of restoring some movies of Stevens, and so I had a lot of work to do. That because I have my suit in my home, I was actually really really lucky.
Okay.
So it had no problem with me, and
Okay.
able to work on my book on archiving.
Cool. How did that become a book for you? So yeah, talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I've always my bent has always been one of a pack rat, and I've always had a fascination with the act of archiving. And on Stevens movies, I've been Stevens' sort of unofficial archivist since the beginning.
Okay.
And I have all the movies we've done. I have all the sound of going back to Sex, Lies, and Videotape. So when we started to do stuff digitally, I was very careful about archiving everything as files.
Mm-hmm.
We started to mix digitally with well, I should say digitally to files with AutoSight in 1988, and we started to make digitally to multi-track with Sex Lies. So I took it upon myself to make sure that I didn't screw up, and indeed, I can give you files. Every file we've ever recorded, I have, and I've migrated, and it's been a point of pride of me. Well, in 2007, the Academy put out a publication, Academy Scientific and Technical uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Group, put out a paper called "The Digital Dilemma," which purported to be about the issues involved in digital archiving,
Yeah.
of which there are many. But it was a completely bass-backwards look at the thing and saying that if you want to archive, you have to do it to photochemical film, you
Yeah.
have to do it to black and white separations, and um, that's bass-backwards. As the saying goes, let me count the ways.
Yeah.
First of all, that doesn't mention sound. Second of all, that doesn't mention the fact that that's a very expensive process.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mention the fact that you're finishing it as ones and zeros, unless you're Christopher Nolan, God help me.
Huh.
Uh,
Huh. Huh.
you're finishing it as ones and zeros, um, and if you're doing that, then you should be preserving the ones and zeros. And
Yeah.
people make a big thing about the act of preserving files, and it's not a problem. I mean, I can just say simply that it sounds egotistical, but it's just true. It's not bragging if you can do it.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it for 25 years.
Yeah.
I've been preserving files for 25 years. And I know that I had no special techniques in New Orleans. I had no special equipment. I just strictly, it's to me, I was just using common sense.
Yeah.
And as a result, we've never had any problems.
Yeah.
And so when I read that the Academy, my head sort of exploded, and then I've given many talks rebutting their findings
Yeah.
over the years at archiving conferences. And then in 2016, Stephen was about to start the movie Logan Lucky. He and his producers were financing it, and they were distributing it too. Stephen formed a distribution company.
Okay.
Um, so we didn't have a studio to back up things. Now, as I said, I've always done the sound of Stephen's movies. I have everything, so that's never been an issue.
Yeah.
But picture when you shot on film, I mean, I don't have camera negatives or cut negatives or even final DIs for most of the movies.
Right.
But I've had the sound elements for Stephen's movies, but because on Logan Lucky, we were going to have to archive everything. I talked with Steve about how I was going to do it, and he then told me some now infamous words to me. He said, "You should write a monograph on this." We'll cut to after we finished the movie. I thought not beyond the monograph. This needed to be a book,
Yeah.
and then it grew. Actually, last year, the year of the 2020, the heavy stuff in the pandemic.
Yeah.
I wrote the majority of the book, and it's now in its current form. It's in 4 parts. The first part is a history of motion picture archiving, with emphasis on things like night trade and
Mm-hmm.
famous movie archives like the Museum of Modern Art and Cinematheque Française and BFI.
Yeah.
And then it talks about the Academy's paper, what's wrong with it. The second part of it is about um, why digital archiving works, and I do a deep dive into all the issues, be it LTO, be it cloud
Yep.
storage, and I go into a deep look at why all that works, and again, a large part of it is that I can quote stuff that I've done. It's not like this isn't an academic paper where which exists to quote other people.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, but that can be a good thing, but it's more often than not, I think, a bad thing, because you could be quoting something that's wrong, but just because you have something in your footnotes means you're attributing it to someone, but to
Yeah.
me, attribution is nothing if what you're saying is bullshit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that's the second part of the book. The third part of the book is the original monograph that Stephen referred to, and that is a deep dive into what we did on Logan Lucky. It goes part by part exactly how we did it, and then the fourth is really fourth part is a continuation of the third, but it basically takes the point of view that you're finishing a movie. How do you do it?
Yeah.
And so we're going to have various Excel grids and make it easy for people who are finishing a movie and who don't care about the history of the Museum of Modern Art film department,
Right.
but they want to know how, suggestions on naming things, and I think that there really needs to be a standard for archiving movies. Now I say that with a very clear and upfront caveat that I have no delusions
Huh.
that you can say, okay, this is the way everything's going to be done. Everybody's doing the same thing. Well, no, each studio is going to do its own thing.
Right.
Each independent film really needs it more because it they're at the mercy of whichever DI facility, whichever sound company
Right.
they use. But it's designed to basically give a buffet of these are your options.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, if you don't have a delivery spec in front of you, then if you do this, and you name it like this,
Yep.
and you put it in these folders, then you're going to be way ahead of the game.
Yep.
And if studios could agree on basics there, with obviously some distinctions made between different studios, which is inevitable, then it would make it a lot easier. If you're Netflix, you're going to pick up an independent production.
Yeah.
It's half the way there.
Yeah.
If you're a small independent film and you're going to be picked up by doesn't matter whom,
Yeah.
it would make it easier there because I know my friends at major studios when they talk about getting an independent film, it's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
They'll get multiple
Yeah.
audio and picture files to say final revised.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, help, Jesus.
Yeah. No, I've lived through it. When we were trying to come up with folder naming standards at Disney a long time ago, it was literally a 4-month argument back and forth just to come up with how are we going to make out a disc folder that represents, production scene shot down to that level,
Yeah.
because it becomes almost a religious war.
Yeah.
So having a book like what you're describing come out and become something that everybody in the industry can use as a reference of, I'm not telling you how to do it, but these are the things that are important to you so that you should keep them in mind, I think will be really, really valuable.
Yeah.
Because it also it takes the load off those individual guys to say, nobody knows what they're doing here, I'll do it. Right? Everybody knows now there is some ideas for a standard, and that's a great way to go.
Yeah, and the thing is that you're always at the mercy of what I call the guy in the machine room in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that's me.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not talking. Yeah, well, that could be you. I'm talking about like if you're at a DI facility
Yeah.
and you've got to name this ProRes file.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That person is going to mix things up, and
Yeah.
I think a real goal is there's a word somewhere out there. Something I really admire, let me say, is some gentleman whose name I have forgotten came up with the naming standard for DCPs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty much been adopted, and it made perfect sense that we needed a standard. And lo and behold, that's what we have. And so that this is the way I view that, which is you might not necessarily agree with it, but it makes things a lot easier on everybody.
Yeah.
If we all follow this by the same rules.
Absolutely. So what do the next 6 months look like for you?
Well, they're really, really busy because I'm finishing up one movie for Steven called Kimmy,
okay,
which is a real sound-centric movie, I should just say. And we're in the midst of restoring about 7 movies whose rights have reverted to Steven.
Okay.
for Steven, and also so I'm doing restoring 7 movies for Warner Brothers that he made for them, and plus a whole bunch of other things, other miscellaneous projects I'm involved with. And then I have to get back to the book, which has been by the side for a long time,
Okay.
for about a year now, and I need to get that out and done, and hopefully it will be out and available by next spring.
Very cool. Is there anything I can plug for you before we go?
Well, it's the book will be called "Solving the Digital Dilemma,"
Okay.
of course, based on the Academy's following from the Academy's paper, and my publishing company's name is Manuela Press, Manuella Press. Do not yet have a website, but we will in probably in about by the end of the year, and take a look out for the book because I spent a ridiculous amount of money making it.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me out of your busy schedule.
This was great, Jeff. Thank you. It was a real honor.